Jim Webb, welcome to the Nexus. Jim is a third generation Marine Corps veteran, a combat veteran in the Iraq War. Um, you're also a journalist, which
Mhm.
I didn't know about initially, also including Afghanistan. And you have been a Capitol Hill staffer, in particular for Senator Rand Paul, I think of Kentucky, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
And you're also a policy expert, which is, among others, why you're here. And you recently launched your own podcast, a Jim Webb podcast, focusing on war, foreign policy, global power dynamics, and other stuff, also national security. Anyway, let me bid you again. Welcome to the Nexus, Jim.
Thank you, Mark. Happy to be here, and thanks for the kind introduction. Guess I consider myself an expert a little bit, but that's for other people to decide. I just tend to run my mouth a little bit. So,
Awesome. So we talked about offline about 2 weeks ago.
mhm.
And since then, I believe, well, actually, just then, I believe you have become a father. And so, as far as I know, you've covered wars, insurgencies, great power competitions. Has becoming a parent, I mean, I just heard about the second kid. I thought that was your first one, but has becoming a parent changed how you think about risk, wars, conflict, and these materials?
Oh yeah, no, it's night and day. I mean, I can go back to a conversation I had with my dad before I went to war, and he had been to war, and he looked me in the eye and said, if you come back, then a lot of things are going to change. And it hit me really hard. But then I didn't have really a reference point for it. It's probably the best way to put it. Until I had my own kids. And then, you look at your own children and you see that innocent little thing, whether it's 2 weeks old, 4 years old, whatever it is. And I could not imagine doing what my parents did, which is, wait every day with bated breath to know if I was going to call them that night or they were going to get a telegram or a message saying that I had been injured or killed. And it's completely different. And there's a little bit of it that happens while you're there, because the greatest tragedy of any conflict is that there are the civilians that are caught in between. They don't want any part of it, generally speaking, and they have to bear the brunt of both sides coming down on them. And you see that when you're in a place, whether it's as a journalist in Afghanistan or actually fighting on the ground as a Marine in Iraq, and you feel for them. But then you see your own kids, and kind of contextualize that where I could not imagine any of my kids carrying a rifle or like, you know, whoa, caught in the middle of something like that. It absolutely would break my heart. And it honestly, it makes me highly emotional just to think about it.
Yeah, I not quite there yet, but there's feelers of my imagination, maybe sort of grasping parts of it. I don't
Mhm.
know. It's yeah, it's a whole nother dimension, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. It's, I mean, you can't really get it until you're there. It's, and I remember some of my friends, they had kids really young and, they would talk about how everything changed. And like, I'd look at them and be like, well, it's changed for me because you're no longer coming out to the bar tonight. So what gives, man? But no, then, you reach that point and it alters everything. And and things that are on the extremes like warfare. It's even more so. I try to actually choke that thought out of my mind because
Mm.
it's something that, I don't know if I'd ever be able to really process it, should it happen. So I prefer not to think about it right now. So it's
Yeah,
just,
that was, I mean, you brought me onto a question which I hadn't planned for, but do you intend to tell them about war to like really scare them off?
yeah, I mean, I do not want my kids to join the military.
Mm.
I just had a son and I already know it's going to be an uphill struggle. When I was 4 years old, my dad, he was working at DOD. He had been a Marine and he had a 30-foot rope in the backyard. And I watched him with his friends from Vietnam, and we would go and shoot all the time. And I thought camouflage was probably the coolest color there ever was. And he came home one day, and I climbed about half the rope at 4 years old and shimmied back down. And apparently, the first thing I said to him was, "Hey, can I be a Marine yet?" And he looked at me and went, well, we need to get you in some athletic programs. So immediately like took me down and signed me up for soccer. But I'll be honest with them at a certain point. It's just like you got to be so careful with that because if you expose them to it too over the top, then it might cause like a little bit of trauma. But if you're not direct enough, you'll vector them in. But I'll have to figure out how to do this, particularly with my son.
Mm,
To give him like raw reality and how, this is not particularly a good idea. And I look at the context of US wars these days, and there's no national interest involved in it. These don't further, any kind of aspects of the American
mm,
people. And I don't really see that changing anytime soon. And I don't like, it's not worth it. Flat out not worth it. I would not go today and fight the Iranians. If it came down to a draft, I would not do it because it's not worth my life, knowing that it would not benefit the people here at home. And
mm.
so long term, I don't see that changing. And I'm gonna try. I'm gonna steer him away. Like I'm hoping my daughter goes to med school and my son plays some kind of professional sport, or maybe he becomes a fisherman. I don't know, but it's just something totally
Fisherman.
different. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it just popped into my head because I had a conversation with friends the other day where I mentioned, because when I grew up, the internet was sort of the new thing, not really new, but getting mainstream everywhere. And what I grew up is starting to navigate the dark net, starting to navigate
Oh,
the really deep stuff of the internet. So I was exposed to a lot of, there was multiple sites, but there was industrial accidents, for example, people
yeah.
getting squished to death. And obviously, this traumatizes you as a to a certain degree as a teenager, right?
Right.
But it also teaches you a lot because I do work a lot with my hands. I do work with big machines from time to time. And so
Mhm.
I know exactly what could happen, right? I know what it looks like. And the same goes, for example, for warfare. I've seen the horrors of Ukraine with the
Yeah.
drones. And honestly, my opinion is this stuff should be in the mainstream. I know there's a lot of
Mhm.
moderating, this euphemism for censorship across the mainstream, like or even
Mhm.
social media like Instagram. But my opinion is a certain degree of trauma when it comes to warfare, for example, is actually a very healthy thing to have. Because right now, for people,
Mhm.
it's this distant, abstract thing, right? But
Right.
if you see people like getting limbs blown off and the likes, just yeah.
Yeah. Now, I mean, you have a strong point. There's a balance there. I had to, on the Ukraine note, had to really adjust my algorithm. It's like I was I would constantly scan for news, and then all of a sudden I would get in this doom loop at like 10 o'clock at night, with everybody getting vaporized by drones and all the different bits and pieces. And that was a byproduct of me wanting to take a look at tactical advances on the ground. And then all of a sudden you just get, I mean, I call it war porn. But there's a balance that has to be struck there where I think you're totally right. I would love for this stuff not to be censored and to be available, like just to be widely available to show people, particularly here in the United States, what that actually looks like over there. Because the technology is flowing down from Ukraine into the Middle East, and the FPV drones in particular, and the ones that are tied to fiber optics are all over Beirut, or like Lebanon, probably Beirut, but Lebanon right now. And that's something that we can't deal with here in the States. We do not have any technology that can counter that. And we have no idea what that looks like. But then the flip side of it, I take a look at really violent video games like Call of Duty. And there's a certain amount of like stomach churning that goes on there, particularly if you've been in combat. Is you can you're like that's like I understand what just happened, but at least it's a video game. But I would not want it to get to the point where it actually desensitizes people, because if you
Mm.
see enough carnage, it doesn't bother you as much
Yeah.
anymore. And but to educate people about the realities on the ground is a very, very good thing. And not to get too graphic or dark, but one of the lessons of combat is that people don't typically die slow. I'm sorry, die fast. It's been a long day, but they die slow. And it's a horrible thing to have to see, regardless of who it is. I mean, they could be your mortal enemy, and you don't want that. You would never wish that on somebody if you have a conscience, and most people do. But it's if that was more apparent, it wasn't so clean like you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like you see like 4 or 5 airstrikes today in Iran. They destroyed a radar site. It's like, okay, well, there's probably like 5 or 6 guys in that radar site, and they didn't die instantly. And seeing the impacts in the media would probably do a lot actually to sway public opinion about what we're doing.
Mm.
So just kind of
Yeah.
trying to think my way through that.
No, I agree. There should be a balance, like an occasional nugget of actual, gore seen by
Mhm.
them, shown by the actual mainstream media, right? But in any case, so the way I wanted this, I sort of thought about this is I would like
Mhm.
to ask you a few questions of about the West in particular, Washington and
Sure.
so on.
Mhm.
And then I would like to widen the scope into geopolitics in the world out there,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So um, the first thing that popped into my mind is when you worked, because yeah, when you worked for in Washington, right, for
Mhm.
Senator Rand Paul,
Mhm.
what do you think would be the largest, the biggest misconception most people have, maybe also outside of the US, about how the power structures, how power actually works?
Oh man. Oh. That's a heck of a question to lead with. So the first thing that comes to mind is this whole concept that that everybody votes on the laws that come out of Washington D.C. The overwhelming majority of laws that are passed are done by what's called unanimous consent. They they pop up on the floor when the floor is open, and if nobody objects to it, it becomes law. It passes.
Oh wow, so
Um,
it's like an inversion of the assumption of innocence. It's like it's passed until proven non-passable.
100%, 100%.
Wow, okay.
Yep. And the rationale behind that is that it's they say it's voted on in committee and it comes out and people are supposed to know what's happening, so they go ahead and do that, and you get some really nefarious stuff that ends up passing through, and they'll do it at all times of day to take advantage of that. So I go back to the widening of the aperture on the 2001 authorization for the use of military force, which put the United States effectively at war with Al Qaeda, but they tucked a provision in there in either 2010 or 2012 uh, at like midnight that
Yeah.
was Al Qaeda and its associates, and that widened the legal aspect of who could be considered Al Qaeda and therefore targeted by DoD to ad infinitum. Anybody, because the legal definition of associated doesn't exist like in that context. So all it takes is a lawyer to stretch it out, and therefore you get after that you have U.S. operating in Africa, Yemen. I mean, you name it. Anybody who's had a cup of coffee with or a phone call with somebody from Al Qaeda was considered fair game, and that's a big part of it. Now, in terms of the overall power structure, I would say that it's not aligned based upon parties.
Hmm.
That's just a show. It's a total show. It's based upon interests that operate behind the scenes and give equally financially to both parties, people on both ends, quote unquote, of the spectrum. And there's only a couple people who are immune to this out of the 500 plus that are up on the hill as representatives and senators. So what you would get, like when I worked on the Foreign Relations Committee on foreign, like issues of foreign policy and war, was this monolithic type of opinion on both sides of the aisle about what we should be doing. Russia is a good example of it. Syria was a good example of it. Where you would have effectively no debate about the merits of doing action X on these countries, and you had a core group of people that spanned both sides of the aisle who would just vote yes no matter what. Like, hey, we need more sanctions on the Russians. We need more sanctions on the Syrians. We need to commit troops here. And this is in the face of what you would say is like the traditional perceptions of the parties. Like you had the Republicans always viewed as kind of the more hawkish types of the George Bush era. The Dems like to cultivate the anti-war narrative going back to the 1960s and 70s, and then up through the Iraq War. And in reality, like it was all issue based, where both sides liked war, and the only difference between the two was whether or not it benefited their party.
Mm.
So you'd have some people on the Dems, you know, speak out against a Republican type of intervention or sanctions package because it benefited the Republican Party in terms of public opinion. But then the pendulum would swing back the other way, and then you'd have a few Republicans speak out doing the same thing. But at the end of the day, it was you get the same result no matter what. It is like they would just like take terms dissenting as pretty much it. So I think that those are the two big paradigms. Is one, Americans don't really get to vote on much of what comes out of Washington. Many of the laws, they just kind of happen. And the the back end is you have these interests that back the parties that ultimately get what they want. And it's almost like I don't know if you're familiar with American professional wrestling, where it's just like
Yeah.
yeah, it's all fake. It's just they get the crowd fired up, and they root for their guy, and then that's it. So
No, it's not fake. He did sleep with his wife, didn't he? Yeah. No, I see what you mean. Actually brings me to my next question. Let me skip one here.
Mhm.
So I'd say to an outside looker, and I've personally I've been sort of red pilled since I don't know, I was roughly 16 to
Mhm.
a it's a long story behind it. So for me, it's not something that I grew out of from like the mainstream, but I've sort of always been here. But those people like me, and I have this, bubble like most people do. It looks from the outside as though the US was steered by a group of vested interests. And I would think best to describe them by maybe financier, big corp, big tech, or whatever the current thing is,
Mhm.
big pharma interests. And so the single most fitting word might actually be plutocracy. And there are, there's examples for this, right? I think one of the most vocal ones is Brian Berletic nowadays. He
Mhm.
mentions the policy strategic papers that have been written decades ago for, well, planning and foreseeing the war in Ukraine. The same with Iran and Operation Timber Sycamore in Syria, and all these conspiracy theories, which, oops, once the damage is done and it suddenly rushes into the mainstream, you know, turn out to be true. Yet we're
Yeah.
still bashing on the current people warning about the current things. Well, so what is your take on that? Do you think that, as you mentioned, voting, laws sort of just happen, but do you think these are the interests driving foreign policy?
I do. I do. It's so there's probably a couple more components to it. But yes, largely absolutely. And I would run this back to World War One, to be honest. World War One or World War Two, where you had the rise of you know your major kind of plutocratic oligarchical type of folks, and the textbook version of fascism, which is, you have the military industrial complex, or major corporations effectively running policy, and they're going to do what is in their best interest. And in the case of World War One and today, it's making weapons. There's not a whole lot of daylight between those two scenarios, in my opinion. And you take a look at the number one export of the United States right now, I believe it actually is weaponry.
Oh, it's
It's our
democracy.
Yeah, exactly. Democracy at the barrel of a gun. It's very, very Trotsky-ish when you start peeling it back. But but yeah, so you have that, and then the 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 interesting thing about Ukraine is I think it's a little more obfuscated than, say, the war in Iran. The war in Iran is very much based upon those same interests, but also somehow we managed to get a foreign government inside the room to convince the president directly about what to do. And then anybody who doubts that can take a look at the statements after we started bombing. And the Secretary of State, Speaker of the House, all are on the record saying, "Yeah, we did this for another country," and that's that's new. But you take a look at like BlackRock's involvement in Ukraine, the weapons manufacturers and defense contractors who are making a ton of money standing up the Ukrainian army and then pushing stuff forward, and the fingerprints are all over it. And if you try to divest that from the way we conducted the Iraq War and try to say it's any different, I would disagree with somebody who did that, because once we got into Iraq, our defense companies effectively, and Afghanistan, drove the bus on what was going on. And there's a really, really nasty part of American politics called corporate personage, where effectively a company or a corporation, for lack of a better term, has First Amendment rights.
Yeah.
Um, and that is a little weird, particularly when you're talking about a defense company, which gets federally appropriated money that goes in and funds them. You bid. I've worked at these companies. You bid on a federal contract, which then funds your company, and then you take that money, which is your earnings, because you're not making money based. You're not selling a weapon system on the open market. You're making X amount of those weapons for the government at a certain price, and you take those profits, they take those profits, and every one of these companies has a lobbying arm, and they hire people in DC to go back into the Senate or back to the White House and to talk in their about their interests, about what they'd like to see. And it's never like, hey, we think next year you guys should stir up some sauce between the Ukrainians and the Russians, and then we can make a bunch of money. It's always with like, it's in the American interest for us
Mm.
to provide them with this capability so that they can defend the edge of NATO or do this. And that was really a big part of to dial it back to Iraq a little bit. That was a huge part there, is that you had Vice President Cheney's own company, Halliburton, become the number one logistics company in the United States, if not the world, based on the contracts they were receiving from the federal government to provide everything from shipping to dining facilities, housing, all these different aspects in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it not only entrenched us there because it was so profitable for so many people at the top, but it actually reshaped the way that the U.S. military even works.
Mm.
If you go back to Vietnam or World War II, like we had all that stuff in house. Engineers would build housing facilities and bases. We trained cooks. We had truck drivers. And by the end of the Iraq War, almost all of that stuff was stripped away, and the logistics were done primarily by private companies
Mhm.
who didn't do a very good job. But at the same time, like the point of all this is the earnings end up spilled back into the process and continue it. So yeah, and I'm trying to think of a really good example from Ukraine for you, but we have so bungled that like there's a lot of people making money, but not exactly having a great impact, I don't think.
Well, if I may help, in Ukraine there was this $1 trillion reconstruction fund,
Mm-hmm.
primarily with BlackRock's
Mm-hmm.
involvement, and now apparently there's a lack of investors. Who would have thought? But that was one of their driving. Well, I would say that was one of the primary issues around the Donbass in particular, where you have all the natural resources, allegedly. But of course, you got to dig deeper, and they're not so easy to get and not so rich as one might have thought. But yeah, about Halliburton, I wrote about a year ago about the Iran-Iraq war, and then also the second, well, maybe third Iraq war, if you want to say, the second with the US.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, maybe you can correct me on that if I'm mistaken. I think Halliburton ate about 3 billion of then dollars, which today probably would be like 10 billion
Mhm.
dollars for reconstruction. And the biggest thing they had reconstructed was 300 kilometers of road. So no one knows where the 3 billion went. I mean, we actually all know where the 3 billion went, but
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And
So
that was endemic. I mean, like on that same line, take a look at the price of a hammer for the US government in Afghanistan, and it was like it's basically the price of like a brick of gold at a certain point. And it's because you charge whatever you want. And
maybe I
part of that
should
was,
pivot. I
oh
should
yeah.
pivot to making hammers
You should. You should make hammers for the US military.
with an eagle on it, right?
Yeah.
So I have a last question on this topic, which is
Mhm.
so you've been from the battlefield over the into German journalism. You've been in Capitol Hill in the politics. Which one of these, well, populations, demographics, journalists, warriors on the ground, and politicians, which ones do you think understand war the best and the worst? And I don't mean just on a tactical level, but
Yeah.
on a strategic level, right?
Oh, wow. Oh, thank you for giving me this. This is going to be fun. So I think that a a junior enlisted Marine or soldier in a combat arms unit probably has a better grasp on the strategic level of war than anybody in Washington.
Huh, okay.
And I wouldn't say I won't say every single one of them do, but the majority of them do. Like, and because we get some pretty bright people who go into the military here. It's a big social mobility vehicle, and at the same time, it's you get exposed to a lot. Now, there's also a huge issue in the United States because we don't have a draft. I'm not pro draft, but there is a giant buffer between those who serve and everybody else. Washington and journalism share kind of the same pipeline, which is it's like credentialism, They all come from top universities. It's self-selecting. They don't have any exposure to anybody in the military, and they get kind of walled off on one side. Journalists would be number two, primarily because I would say they're there, but they don't necessarily, they're not as exposed as they think they are. Way, way in dead last place are the politicians and the political class and the staff. I mean, when I worked on the Hill, I worked for Senator Rand Paul, who was very much anti-intervention, and one of my jobs on the Foreign Relations Committee was to kind of gum up the war making process overseas. And we had these weekly meetings with all the staffers, and it became kind of a from all the different staffs. I had Marco Rubio was in the room, Lindsey Graham. I mean, you name it, Cory Booker. I mean, it was a an interesting time to be on that committee, but their staffers were hardcore hawks, and they all shared similar characteristics. They were in their mid to late 20s, had gone from undergrad to an internship to a junior staff role to grad school, had never left Capitol Hill. They would get their handheld tours through different areas of the world where they were shown all the bright, shiny spots that America is, doing great, like never Iraq, never Afghanistan. Um, and they had a strange perception of how the world worked, and that American power was the thing, keeping up the righteous and keeping down the bad people. And then here I come, having been enlisted in the infantry for a while, and start trying to tear apart what they're doing, or at least having a conversation about it. And I was treated like, I had some sort of deformity growing out of my forehead whenever I talk. And it was really strange to me because I had been on the ground as a journalist. I had been on the ground as an infantryman. I had been immersed in these cultures. I literally lived in Iraq for basically a year with the population. And that's, you would get all kinds of college credit for that if it wasn't the military. It was one heck of a year abroad.
Mm.
And it's having a differing perception is not rewarded up there. That's also part of it. It's like it goes back to the self-selecting nature, and so they screen people out who might have a real basis on reality. One thing I would love to see here in the United States is a return of veterans into the political process. We're kind of kept out. It's kind of a caste system, if you will, and it's very unfortunate that I have to say that. But if you had a bunch of guys who had fought in Iraq, Afghanistan, get elected on the common message, which is these never-ending wars and adventures in these different countries don't really produce anything except animosity, it would undermine the thing we talked about with the plutocracy here a second ago. It would break that up in a heartbeat. So there's all kinds of barriers to entry and gatekeepers for these folks. I'm lucky enough to have a dad who was elected. He was a senator, and had some relationships where I got hired. And but you only have one Rand Paul in the Senate, and you probably have one or two more guys up there on both sides of the aisle who would hire somebody who's willing to embrace that message. And as a byproduct of that, their message is very much bottled up.
Mm.
So there's only so much opportunity, and there's only so many chances for these folks to get inside the ecosystem. So
Yep.
but if I had my druthers, I would change that in a heartbeat.
There's, well, thank you for that. There's so many strings to pull from what you just
Yeah.
said. I noted down some of those strings. So that system with the pipeline you said, with the people that are walled off, that have this self-managing, self-cleansing system of castes and I don't know, Ivy League diplomas, and look, I've been there, did my internship with this guy and that guy and so on. It's actually quite the amazing, sophisticated system for censorship, for actually undermining pluralism, because you don't have actual censors, but you have a self-fulfilling, self-refilling ecosystem of, walling off, as you said, and filtering the right kind of mindset, the neocon mindset, so to say, the hawk mindset is actually ingenious. I don't think someone designed it. I think this is sort of organic, or if someone designed it, then kudos. That is amazing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just wanted to also join on that about how you were looked at it as though you had a deformity, because I just recently sort of lost a job myself. I was a physics teacher, and what we had is this: in the first 5 minutes of class, you could do virtually whatever you wanted. Some people stretched, others sang, others just, I don't know, had a little conversation with the students. And I mean the high school students from 15, 16 onwards. And what I did is I dared teach them media competency. So one example I did is I pulled this article from 1855 of the First Crimean War, right? The Ottoman War against the Russians. And
Mhm.
by 1855, I think the war was already ongoing for 2 years, right? And so I pulled this article, which is a black and white article from the London Times, the biggest, most, well-known journal back then. And so in the paragraph, it's about, I don't know, a 3-4 minute read. It's like three short paragraphs, and there's 5 points out of them. What was it? The Tsar is an evil man, right? Putin is an evil dictator. Who would ever have thought that one would have done any harm to Russian, in Old English? So basically saying the Russians just attacked, no one did anything to them, and now we know that's actually the Ottoman Empire that attacked them in Crimea, right?
Mhm.
Then the Russians understand only one thing: violence. You can't negotiate with them. If we don't stop them back then in the Black Sea, right, they will take over Constantinople. If we don't stop them today in Ukraine, they will take over the Baltics. And the fifth point, I can't remember. It was 1-to-1, the same propaganda for 200 years straight
Yeah.
from then to today. And so I just showed them these kinds of little media competency things. I never picked any side, but that was already too much daring to question us as the shining pillar of democracy in the world. And I mean us, the West, the US,
Right.
Switzerland. I live in Switzerland, and so on. So yeah, it is. Yeah, it is an evil system. Do you think? So my next question is, do you think we can vote ourselves out of this?
No, no.
I'm curious.
So, man, okay. Once again, it's a great question. So I gotta organize my thoughts here for like 2 seconds. I'm gonna buy time by meandering around here. Um, so you have these different systems and ecosystems, right? And I think you're absolutely correct that the self-selecting systems here. I live in Florida now, by the beach, and I love it. But
Mm,
this I grew up in DC, right outside of it. But the self-selecting systems that are in place are both accidental and now deliberate.
mhm,
So you have it like you have the think tanks. This feeds up into politics, like actual elected leaders. But they become moneyed and they become uh, well known and people want to go work there. And because people want to go work there, they will tailor their views to what is profitable because on the back end of that, you get access.
yeah.
And so it's kind of a funnel. And I've been in and out of the realism and restraint community's attempt to kind of co-opt that system. But you're talking about a system that's been around and for 60 years probably,
Mhm,
and has continually refined itself, continually become more moneyed, continually gained more access, and then they put their people in place all over the spot, all over the place. So if you look at Marco Rubio's staff, people in the White House, and this is administration after administration, it's people pulled from these think tanks to go there. And they're placed there by people who had been there, like, shall we say, the political generation before, the administration before. So it has its own kind of inertia that is very hard to break up. And I think if you look at Trump's first term, where I still believe he had a desire to make a difference, to really actually drain the swamp, and found himself completely unable to do it because he had no idea what he was looking at in terms of what the swamp actually was, and it ate him alive. And then a whole bunch of things happened in between there, which have incentivized him to become the ultimate neocon, if you will. And he's had a reversion back to the norm, but then further over even. So that exists, and it's self-preserving. Now, the exact same thing exists on the political side. If you want to run for office in the United States, you have to be a member of one of the parties, one or the other. And this is very tangential, but I think it creates a very good argument for a parliamentary system, where you just have proportional voting. You know, if you get 10% of the popular vote, you get 10% of the reps for any party or anybody out there, because otherwise you have a chokehold. And one of the things we've seen here in America, and I was stunned. I worked for a company as we call it a 1099, which is a contractor.
Oh,
So I wasn't an official benefits receiving employee. I was, a hired consultant, during this election. And the company that hired me, I thought I was joining a guy's campaign. Like he's a sitting U.S. senator now. I thought that like I was being brought on for my policy expertise, and they were gonna, you know, Mr. Smith goes to Washington type of thing. They were gonna pay me out of the generous donations of the people for my expertise on these different things. Turns out I got hired by this company that could provide 97% of a campaign to a candidate that was backed by Ted Cruz. And at the top, yeah. And it's like, okay. And they still hired me. Like, all right. But I mean, that's everything short of like private jets. And now once again, there's a gatekeeper to get in there. So you have to interview with somebody and they decide whether or not you have the right policy perspectives or the right credentials to be backed by this machine that will get you into office. And while you're there, you have to make sure that all the people who donate to them, who pay their bills, are also satiated. So what this looked like in the state of Missouri while I was there was that I was the field director for the campaign and doing some policy advice on different things. Uh, our candidate, who subsequently got elected, spent most of his time out of the state, glad handing with folks like APAC and other organizations, while I gave his stump speeches, like because we had a 10-point lead. But at the same time, like that's where the focus is. It was not this bottom up, type of construct, which most people think of as American democracy. It was very much an organization was picking somebody who was going to best represent the views of the party and placing them inside of it.
Yeah.
And you have that on both sides of the aisle, all over the place. And taking a look at Thomas Massey in Kentucky, who just got beat in his primary, they dumped $33 million into a primary in Eastern Kentucky. And that is not a wealthy area. And the biggest thing about that is you had the whole machine from the party turn out and descend on Massey. And what I mean by machine is the biggest thing the most important thing in a campaign is your ground game. You have to get out there, you have to shake hands, you have to identify the different segments who are going to vote for your candidate, and then you have to enable them to cast a ballot. And the entire Republican app. Go ahead. Sorry.
Excuse me for interrupting. Just as an outside looker, I would have thought it's the media campaigns that are the biggest thing, because the other guy, whatever his name was, the APAC funded guy, he didn't even show up to debates. He didn't shake any hands, did he? He was just sort of in the background, and he still won, right?
He did. Yeah. This was like the best that I can identify it. It was a carbon copy of Biden's campaign in 2020, where you hide the candidate because he's so bad in front of people, but you go to the prospective voters who or you think are going to vote for this guy, and you just hand him a sheet like, oh, you don't like Trump, you don't like Thomas Massey. Well, here's my guy, and here's what he does. Show him some video clips, and you get him primed up and ready to go. And then you make it easier for them to cast a ballot. Like if you look at 2020 in the United States and you look at the primary in Kentucky, both of those have the same difference maker, which was mail-in ballots. And there's a lot of people saying like, well, it's all crooked and whatever. Okay, maybe, but really what the issue is you had the time and the money to identify a block of people who were going to put your candidate in office, and you made sure they voted. And the Trump campaign in 2020 was god awful at that. That was their weakest point. They actually tried to downplay mail-in voting instead of embracing it. And Trump's got all kinds of rhetoric out there. He's like, oh, my people show up. It's like, well, actually, they don't. Like, people don't like to go to the polls here in the United States.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess a revolution it is then.
Oh, I mean, it's I mean, you got to have some kind of there's got to be some kind of revolution. I'm not advocating for like, a violent uprising or anything like that, but you're never going to break through the system. It's got everything in place. And one of the biggest bait and switches I've seen in a long time here in the US is this whole issue. I don't know if you guys are following this in Europe, but this whole issue of gerrymandering, where you have different states that are trying to rig the electoral map in order to get more congressmen elected. So they're drawing artificial lines everywhere. So Virginia tried to do that. It's all jammed up. Maryland's really bad at it, and they're doing it to be pro-Democrat. And on the flip side, you have state legislatures and senators and even the president standing up and thumping their chest about places like Texas, Florida. Like, oh, we got to make sure this is offset and it's all Republican. But what you end up doing with that is you redraw the lines on the map to make sure that both the Republicans and the Democrats have control. Like you're eliminating any kind of dissent away from what their base is and ensuring a stranglehold on the system for, forever, basically. And that's got to stop. So I don't know how you fix that necessarily, but the idea that we're going to get like 400 good people to run for Congress at the same time and completely revamp the system is just pure fantasy.
Yeah. No, unfortunately, I agree with you. It's just, the mechanisms put in by these people are designed such that they could never overthrow and actually change the system.
Mhm.
But yeah, so let's keep the revolution in our backheads and move from from, I don't know, politics, Washington, democracy into geopolitics. I wanted to touch on these items too because this is your expertise after all, right? So,
Allegedly. Yeah.
well, among many other things, of course.
Thank you.
So, personally, I would say let us start with Ukraine. This is closer to home, at least from my perspective here in
Yeah.
Europe. The way I see this is in many ways actually a hopeful thing because I did not expect this just less than 4 years ago. Seems like the pivot point of the downfall of the US empire and the transition to a new world order. Would
Mhm.
you agree with this very broad assessment at this
Yes.
point? Yeah.
Yes.
And so here's the more critical question. If you look at history, these transitions, be it the end of the, I don't know, Mayan Empire, the end of the Iranian, the Persian Empire, or be it the end of the Roman Empire with all the knives into some person's body, torso, I don't think there is one empire that comes to mind that collapsed without a massive cataclysm, which I
Mhm.
would say is the Soviet Empire that dissolved itself.
Mhm.
But do you think we can survive this one without a nuclear Armageddon?
Man, I hope so. Um, wow. So it depends, it depends completely on how the United States handles this. Um, and the writing has been on the wall and for quite some time that multipolarity, a multipolar world is the way to go, and it's the way of the future. You have too much economic power in China. Russia has figured itself out after being out in the wilderness for a while, and there has been a tremendous amount done by the United States to bring the Russians and the Chinese into an alliance, which is like kind of antithetical to history. But here we are. So avoiding a nuclear conflict there is going to hinge on the United States' ability to admit what is going on in front of them.
But
And
allow me a little pushback on that.
go ahead.
The way I see it, I think I would say that this more depends on China and Russia, but primarily China to manage the downfall of the US in such a way that there is no that it doesn't show any I don't know any belly for the US to punch into, right?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
There's probably a
Yeah.
better
No.
expression than that, but you know what I mean, right? So
Mhm.
I believe my current view is that it's more on the shoulders of Russia and China to actually manage the US decline without pushing too much or pushing back too much and leaving them always a way out, right? For example, in
Mhm.
the Iran war, something which Iran currently is having a hard time to do, which is understandable, is giving the US an off ramp, which looks like a victory to, well, Iran is the next topic, but you know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like
Mhm.
managing the decline of the US empire. What do you think about that?
So, so I agree with you completely on that. It is on them, and I hate to say this, but I believe the Chinese are way more equipped to do that than the United States is. And I take your point completely on that. But so when I say it's on the U.S. to not provoke it's well when I say it's on the U.S. it's for us not to provoke a nuclear conflict where we're inflicting, indirectly a tremendous amount of casualties on the Russians.
Mm.
And we wouldn't stand for that in a heartbeat. Now and I think it's on us to recognize that there is a point of diminishing returns in that conflict, no matter what your policy perspective is, that has long since been reached. Like the diminishing returns for me was day one. But, at a certain point, we have to recognize that pushing Russia too far is going to get some sort of, massive response that through all the media rhetoric here in the United States will come as a surprise to us. But if you've been following the conflict, it will not be a surprise at all, considering the amount of damage we've done to their military through our aid and, direct military aid, intelligence aid, however you want to call it. So it's going to be increasingly hard. I agree with you. Increasingly hard to keep, particularly the Russians, at bay, because they've paid so much so far. Now that ties into like some of the fear mongering here domestically, where like, oh, they're going to end up in Paris. Like, no, no, they don't have the ability to take Kiev, um, for better or worse. And it may not be by design, but I think their slow march through Donbass and into Ukraine, is actually a deliberate attempt up to the start of the Iran war as to not inflame NATO to the point where they felt like there was an emergency they had to step in. It was a deliberate slow walk. And it's also we just don't understand their style of warfare here in the United States at all. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the truth. But you know, as long as the we do not provoke the Russians in particular too far, I don't think that China is a military problem for the United States. They do not want a war. If you look at the way they took over Hong Kong, I would put money on Kaohsiung right now, and I may do it after we're done here, that they do the exact same thing in Taiwan, where it's just a an infiltration, and then they kind of co-opt the government to vote themselves in as a province again. I mean, that would be the Chinese way of doing it. Fight the war without actually having to fight, and they know better than to pick a kinetic fight with the United States, because while they might come out on top on a long enough timeline, there's going to be a tremendous amount of collateral damage to their country, and it could possibly escalate into a nuclear conflict, and they don't want that. But the tangible benefit here, and like I think it's the only silver lining with the Iran war for the United States and globally, is the fact that it has not gone well, and we have expended so many munitions that were earmarked for Asia, and actually pulled out of Asia, that we no longer have the capacity to really confront the Chinese in the Pacific at all. It's We've burned through, you know, any number or any percentage really of high percentage of stuff like the Prism missiles. I mean, all of our standoff munitions that would be absolutely of utmost importance in that kind of conflict, and our military understands that. The White House doesn't, but I don't think that there is the stomach in the United States to have a major war with the Chinese. But the back end of that is, how far do you push the Russians? I don't think there's no cost benefit analysis going on with that conflict in Washington D.C. at all, because it doesn't show up. It's just munitions going over there. Oh, we can always dump more money into the military industrial complex to backfill, say, artillery rounds or Bradleys or whatever it is. But they don't see the human costs on both sides, or at least admit it. I think the overall casualty numbers are still classified by Ukraine and by proxy the United States. But so there's no accountability, and that's the one flashpoint you could see, I think. But I'm hopeful that the disproportionate relationship we have with the Israelis right now kind of enables that to naturally peter out on its own, and Russia will bring that to a close kind of on their terms in the near term.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, so this sort of brings me to, I guess, my last question in the realms of geopolitics. I mean, I assume you had run about an hour. I didn't ask
Oh, we
you.
can keep going. I got more time. So
Okay, okay. So maybe two more. About that
sure.
one, the last thing you said, I think they do have an interest, because you got to see it from the perspective of these actual policy decision makers, right? Those
Mhm.
people lobbying, those people who may or may not have a public face out there, right? So what happens to them is they push legislation, media, think tank, all the whole machinery, make it run into a certain direction. The direction is more war. Why? Because that way you have European and American taxpayer money getting funneled into Ukraine without any accountability, without any oversight
Right.
or audit into it. So you can do with it whatever you want. So part of it goes right into their pockets. Part of it
Mhm.
goes right into Ukrainian oligarch pockets. A large part gets into weapon sales, and those people that are hired by Lockheed Martin and others, they profit, and there's also a lot of insider trading going on. So this is perfect for them. There's no American lives being wasted. There's
Mhm.
simultaneously also weakening a strategic opponent, so they can sell it as a national security issue, right?
Mhm.
Put the veneer of national security on there, but they're making s tons of money if I
Mhm.
you know what I mean? So this is
Mhm.
perfect for them. I think this is yeah, this is just a great money laundering machine for them. And now they're going into this next phase. I don't know if you heard, they are thinking about putting Budanov in instead of Sirski.
Yeah.
Budanov, who has no general staff training whatsoever. He's not a military man. He's a former spec op soldier. And well, I agree with the Duran. This seems like just a plan for the insurgency war that they want to do once the conventional kinetic war is over. So they really
Mhm.
want to bleed Ukraine to the last Ukrainian. So yeah, I mean, just from that perspective, it does seem to make a lot of sense to me, viewing it from these people's minds, right?
Oh yeah. No, I agree with you on that, but there's a couple different pieces I would inject in there. One, I don't know what the temperature of the Ukrainian people is right now, but I imagine they're
Mhm.
sick of this, very sick of this. And from what I know about Budanov, he does not have a very good reputation among the Ukrainian military. Um, he doesn't uh, he doesn't seem to use his people very well, I think is
Mhm.
the best way to put it. But they are incredibly war weary, and a key indicator, and it's like the interesting point by the guys at the Duran, love those guys. Um, is they're prepping for an insurgency. And if you're prepping for an insurgency, it means you're about done.
Yeah.
And the issue with that is that you have to have buy-in from your population to continue the fight, and then that changes the whole logistical dynamic of it. So you may have some hardliners who still want to continue an insurgency, but I don't think the population writ large is motivated to do that. If you look at the different bits and pieces that have come out over the years on what happens to recruiters when they go into towns and how they have to basically press gang the males, they get attacked by the women. And the fact that's even coming out in the media is a big deal.
Mhm.
And once the Russians, if they like crack open the line, and I don't think they're going to go all the way to Kiev. I don't think they want to. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens to the overall national morale in the country. As long as if East and West Ukraine stay kind of split up, and it becomes a rump state, I think you'll see a lot of people lay down their arms. This is just my perception of it. I could be totally wrong. I am
And
not an expert on Ukraine itself, but
may I ask you on that one, since you
Mhm.
have experience also, common experience in Afghanistan, where you did have an insurgency, if I'm
Mhm.
not mistaken, in Iraq as well. About that insurgency, the way you said you have to have the support of the population. My question is, if memory serves me, I did a long research and I wrote a long article on Ukraine with 240 sources that I put in there. And if memory serves me, I believe it was about 1/4 to 1/3 of the entire Ukrainian military in the beginning, 2022, 2023, which accounts for about 250,000 men, are part of those far right, let's call them Nazis or neo-Nazis,
Mhm.
members that glorify Melnik, that glorify Bandera and the OUN and all that. Um, isn't it enough to just have a critical mass of those, even if populations writ large don't support this, to keep an insurgency up?
It is. That's a lot of guys. That is a lot of guys. But so that would also break down into the geography. Where are they from? Where do they live?
Mm-hmm.
It's if you let's see here, Afghanistan. The big ethnic troublemaking group, for lack of a better term, were the Pashtuns, and they were largely in the south, and they went up into Pakistan, and that was the Taliban heartland. That was also a lot of the core resistance against the Soviets. But hypothetically, right? If they're say Silesian, or from Western Ukraine, and there's not a lot of Russian population over there, as long as the Russians don't step there, they
Mm-hmm.
probably won't have a problem. I would be very surprised to see like infiltrations into the eastern part, the heavily Russian areas. in that context. And that just becomes maybe at first, but it becomes very, very, very difficult, particularly if you have an ethnic split.
Mhm.
To go back to Afghanistan for a second, some of the central regions were Hazara, they were Shiite, but also ethnically different from the Pashtuns, and they provided the bulk of the Afghan army for what it was while we were there. There's a similar dynamic in Iraq where there was fighting from both Shia and Sunni, but the core of the insurgency in Iraq was the Sunnis, and it was largely because we were there and we brought Shia in to basically put them down. Which the downstream impact of that was really empowering Iran, which was just, I mean, it's like a whole other conversation. But but you have that component, and then you have the other aspect of it, which is just straight up logistics, right? Um, in order to get rid of the Soviets in Afghanistan, we had to set up a pipeline through Pakistan that was supported by the Saudis. And it went up into training camps and they infiltrated across the border into the Pashtun areas and then somewhat infiltrated throughout the country, but they really didn't necessarily hold territory. They just harassed and they would blend back into their natural homeland. Um, in Iraq, you had there wasn't so much a pipeline of munitions coming in. It was the fact that on like, the first provisional coalition order was the disillusionment of the Iraqi army and branding anybody who is a member of the Ba'ath Party, persona non grata, and anybody who even so much as guarded a weapons depot went home. So you had, I mean, the entire munition stockpile for an army out in the open that they could grab, and it became a giant headache. But I don't necessarily see that in Ukraine. I would, and maybe I'm just being hopeful here, but I would see if the Russians took the entire country, which I don't think they want to do because of this exact type of scenario, you would have intense localized insurgency in non-Russian areas, and not even necessarily Ukraine areas, but you go to the western part of the country, which is it's heavily culturally Polish, German, leftovers
Hungary.
from from the empire phases, who are not they're not Russian. They don't want to have anything to do with the Russians, but they also want to be left alone. You go to the eastern part of the country, it's very heavily Russian, quote unquote Ukrainian. I think it'd be a lot less there. And then you may actually find that the people in the eastern part of the country, if there was infiltrations from the western part, wouldn't want it. They want to get back to their regular life. They've had enough of war. So
Mhm.
that's my hypothesizing on that. But I do take your point.
No, interesting. Thank you very much for that. I did not consider that that aspect that you just mentioned, that insurgency actually is a localized phenomenon. You'd have to have people living there, I don't know, probably spying on the military, paramilitaries to do their harassment, their attacks, their terrorism, probably.
Mhm.
That's a very interesting point. It's actually is, I guess, a complicating issue for Budanov and other forces of that kind.
Yeah, big
Yeah.
time.
Well, thank you for that. I did not consider that at all. That was not on my radar.
Oh, cool.
So I, I think we're about an hour, and you said Iran is a whole other topic. I would like to do Iran, but how about we do this in another episode?
Sure.
I
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
that would be better. Also for the audience, I think 1 hour cut is a good one,
Yeah,
right?
it's about to good time. Yeah, no, anytime, man. Yeah, have it back next week if you want.
So let me go into perhaps maybe an optimistic or solution ending.
Mhm.
I watched your stream, your live stream just before. I mean, snippets of it. And I heard you say some nice things about maybe the youth doing their part, changing, going maybe to vote. And that is just one thing that I heard. But let me ask you the more general thing. What is besides podcasting, right, and putting
Mhm.
information out there? What can we do? What is there something that gives you genuine optimism today?
Organize. Have to
Organize.
organize. And I think that's happening. It always gets fractured, unfortunately. It always gets co-opted. But you just got to look back and recognize the fault lines on it. And one thing I just talked about probably 2 hours ago was the data coming out on voting trends and popularity of the president in different age groups. And between 19 and 29 years old, which is like your fervent, let's get out there and vote for the first time. I'm politically motivated types. He's got like a 70 something percent disapproval rating and like a 12% approval rating. That's very, very, very hopeful. I like that, but it backs into the big problem, at least here in the United States, which is that demographic does not show up to the polls.
Yeah.
The last time that showed up to the polls, we got Barack Obama, and he found a way to motivate them, and that was through intense organizing. And his background was actually in community organizing, so he revolutionized the way that campaigns run. He was the first guy to really use Facebook. They created, little local groups on social media that would meet up in towns, and you keep people's attention, you keep them involved, you get them to vote.
Huh.
And I think that we have a real opportunity here, in the United States right now, as long as we can put all of the culture war stuff on the back burner for a minute to really do that again. There's some good people who have stepped forward, like Joe Kent. He has tried to run for Congress a couple times, but the guy's got a resume that's like 20 pages long in terms of his contributions to the country. And people from across the political spectrum, libertarians have seen the light, if you will. Your traditional Democrats no longer have a home. It's the progressive wing of the Democrat Party is so wrapped up in culture issues that they've lost sight of what really matters. But that's only probably 15 to 20% of that party at best. And you have a whole bunch of disaffected Republicans.
Yeah.
It's you have your traditional neocon base, which are the guys who got rid of Thomas Massey. They're aging out rapidly,
Mm.
from life, just generally. So we do have a bad habit of dead people voting in the U.S., but I would see that coming to an end pretty soon, hopefully. But the people behind them are very much like their peers on the other side of the aisle, and it's anecdotal, but a little story for you to kind of close. Like I lived in Baltimore for a long time, and I would commute to DC, and that is one of the most hardcore left-wing Democratic cities in America. And on my block, I was a bit of an anomaly, fascinating points. Like, ooh, this guy, he might be libertarian. He's conservative. He works for Rand Paul. He lives here. What's going on?
Oh no.
And my, this couple that lived a couple houses down from me, were socialists, hardcore socialists. And I got to know them very well. I would never talk politics with them. But then one day, like during COVID, I decided to bring it up. Like, hey, like, what do you guys want? Like, like what's your ideal America? And the issues they listed out were identical to what I wanted, were identical to what pretty much everybody I talked to. It was they wanted government out of their lives, which was ironic for a socialist, but they wanted to basically be left alone, decide things locally, and they wanted what was best for them and their family. And like that's kind of the baseline core of everything. And if we can focus on that, I think people are really starting to focus on that with $7 gas, just all of our money going overseas, not having the ability to participate in major decisions like where we sit right now. Like if we can't control where our tax dollars go, and we can't control where our kids get sent off to die. And people are starting to recognize like, hey, wait a minute, if you can't control those two things, then maybe you don't have much of a say in the process. So people are waking up, and if we can corral that, and I think we can, then there is some hope moving forward, politically at the ballot box.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, then again, we can't fix it by voting, can we? But anyways,
Yeah.
yeah, we got to see the upside also, because
Mhm.
we do have also a bunch of billionaires buying themselves rocket ships to leave Earth for when shit hits the fan, right? So
Bye.
no, but it's very funny that you mentioned also the socialist thing, because I do have a whole point here which I skipped over because it's a Pandora's box. I would say I'm maybe a socialist depending on the word, of how I define it. And there is a
Mhm.
lot of common grounds, and there is a whole debate to be had about libertarians, because I also am the libertarian. I do want personal freedom. I do want to be able to, I don't know, drive my car with the windows down and whatnot. And but well, just one sentence to encapsulate what I mean with that.
Mhm.
Freedom is not a straightforward thing. You don't get
Mhm.
freedom by walking in the direction of freedom. Freedom is multidimensional and complex.
Yeah.
So just deregulating and removing the government, what will it do? It will make the big corporations eat up the government and build it up again into a surveillance state, right?
Yep.
So there is a complex path to be walked. But anyway, let's keep that maybe also for the next
Yeah.
next time. And so Um, Besides the amazing Jim Webb podcast, which you just
Oh,
started,
thanks.
where can people follow you?
So I am on X. It's James Webb underscore 16 on X. And really the only other place you can find me, I do have a Substack, but I don't maintain it. That is on me. That'll change pretty soon. It's called the Webcast. You can take a look at that. I have probably one post where I was talking about the debate between uh, JD Vance and whoever that goofball who was Kamala Harris's VP select. Haven't really maintained it. I write for Responsible Statecraft every now and then, but if you really want to get a flavor of what's going on, look up the Jim Webb podcast on YouTube, on it's on Rumble, and also on anywhere you get your audio podcast. But we do a daily show every Monday through Friday, noon to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
I will link that up and just
Cool.
before, well, one final question. What is
Yeah.
up with that dog with the crown in the background?
Oh, that's my dog, Charles.
Oh,
My wife got
amazing.
that for me. Yeah, he's around here somewhere. But I have a German short hair pointer, and he's awesome.
Okay.
And my wife got me that picture, I think for Christmas a couple years ago.
I love it. It
Oh,
just caught my
thanks. Yeah,
attention for some reason.
he actually does look a lot like that. But good luck trying to put a crown on his head. He
You need to
wouldn't
give him
stand
a
for that.
scepter too, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If it was wide, if it was a wide shot enough, you probably see a scepter, but it's just his head. So
Awesome. Well, amazing. Thank you very much, Jim. Congratulations again
thank you.
to your son.
Mhm.
And well, see you next time, hopefully.
Yep, Mark, really appreciate it. Anytime. Just let me know when you want me to come back.